Hey guys, so I'm not dead. I'm so sorry for not posting for about a month or so though, but things have been really busy lately. Cramming for finals and a teacher thinking it'd be funny to assign a 12-page paper have kept me quite occupied. But now that it's summer, I should be active again. I might even have a big project in the works coming up for this channel, so stay tuned for that. Thank you all for being patient with me, and without further ado, let's begin. Okay, so my story needs a bit of backstory first. I am, and have always been, a very small girl, standing at about 4'11 despite being 27 years old, and I've always been able to pass as much younger than I am, especially if I'm not wearing any makeup. When I was a small child of about 7 or 8, my father bought a little cabin in a town in Texas called Livingston, in an area of Livingston called Onalaska. I specify this because of the second part of my story. Anyone with kids there needs to be wary of this area. The cabin was really nothing remarkable, only 600 square feet. It was really just one giant room, a teeny kitchen the size of a normal bathroom, and a bathroom the size of a large closet, and a porch out in front. The whole property consisted of 2 lots, so there was plenty of space, but the cabin itself was pretty dinky. This whole area was a strange mix between backwoods and suburbia. It was a true neighborhood, but not in the prim and neatly kept neighborhoods that I'm used to in suburbia Houston. Despite this, I became very fond of the place, and some of my greatest memories in my life are at this cabin, including my evacuation story from Houston during Hurricane Rita, but that's a story for another day. Anyways, around 11 to 12 years old, my father bought me a 4-wheeler, and then the little lake town suddenly became quite a lot bigger. I didn't go super far, but I definitely ended up going farther than I had ever gone before, and it was quite common to see me zipping up and down the roads with a pile of neighborhood kids in the back of the 4-wheeler when we would go up the lake to the lake house on weekend visits. This was around 2001 or 2002, so cell phones were a thing, but it was still common for people to not have them. Usually I had a beeper that I carried around, but no phones at the lake house. My father gave me a walkie-talkie with a very long reach instead. Looking back on it now from a world of cell phones, this seemed like a bad idea, but this was a very small town, and we had spent so much time here that it felt safe. So one of these weekends, I was buzzing around my neighborhood like I usually did, and I stopped at this peninsula that overlooked the lake. This was a set of docks that us kids always came to when we wanted to swim, despite the very real threat of giant alligators, but being stupid kids, we really didn't care about that. And I was overlooking the lake when my walkie-talkie buzzed to life. Naturally thinking it was my parents trying to reach me, I answered quickly. I couldn't make out what they said at first, so I tried confirming that it was my dad. This point in the neighborhood was a little ways from the cabin, but I had reached my parents from this point before, so despite the fact that I could not quite recognize the voice, I assumed it was my dad. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first. I don't exactly remember how the conversation went, but it was off enough that I remember being slightly annoyed. Garbled questions that I answered, but no answers that would have hinted who I was or where I was. Eventually the conversation started to drift in a way I knew something was off, but I was not alarmed yet, as my dad was notorious for pulling pranks on me and goofing around. I kept talking stupidly. Alarm bells weren't going off yet. Finally, though, the guy on the other end of the walkie-talkie made a comment. I cannot for my life remember what exactly he said, but it was enough for me to make me doubt that this was indeed my father. This is when things took an extremely creepy turn. Bear in mind, I had been talking to this guy pretending to be my father for a good 15 minutes, sitting on my 4-wheeler on this peninsula.
I can see you. You should come take a ride on my boat.
He said. My father had a boat, but this was so out of character that it made me realize that this was definitely not my father. Dad? You're not Dad, are you?
What are you talking about?
He said. If you can see me, I said. I started feeling a bit peeved that this guy had been messing with me. What am I wearing? He paused for a second before the walkie crackled to life, and he said very clearly,
You're wearing an orange shirt. You have red hair, and you're sitting on a red 4-wheeler right by the swim docks. Why don't you come ride on my boat?
At this point, my eyes widened and my blood ran cold. This entire time, some strange guy that I didn't know had been watching me from God knows where. It took me maybe 10 seconds to look around wildly, and then kick the four-wheeler up and race out of there as fast as I could that the wheels had a hard time catching the ground. I remember the wheels spun out against the gravel beneath them, and when the four-wheeler finally started moving, little me had a hard time holding on. I floored it the entire way home, stopping in the middle of the yard, and I burst into the house. Obviously, the first thing I did was ask my parents if they had contacted me, which they had not, and hadn't for hours. I was in such a panic that I knew there was no way my dad wouldn't have confessed had it been him. He was a practical joker, but he knew when the fun was over. I hate to think what would have happened if I continued sticking around the area, or I hadn't figured out that it wasn't just my dad pulling my leg. Nothing came of this incident, though, and my childhood up there resumed as normal. Eventually the weekend visits stopped, but the story doesn't end there. During my parents' divorce, I moved to live in the lake house permanently with my father, or at least until we could find something better. This was the only place we could go when he left my mother, which is a long story in of itself, but I won't get into that. My father had recently suffered from health issues, so I took a job at a nearby gas station or tobacco barn to pay the bills and let him recuperate. Thankfully, the lake house had no bills to save for electricity, water, and internet, so my small salary was enough to keep us going. I only worked there for 3 months, but those 3 months were by far the creepiest I've ever experienced. Within the first month, a rather tall and obese man became infatuated with me, and he couldn't have been creepier about it. He had a short, crew-cut hair and slightly unkempt beard and mustache combo. The first time we ran into each other, he stared at me with those wide, crazy eyes, ordered his gas, and just stood there for 2 to 3 solid minutes, just staring. When I asked if I could help him, he said nothing. Now, part of the tobacco barn I worked in was strictly the gas side, and I was pretty much in a glass box with an opening to take people's money and give them their cigarettes, which I could not have been more thankful for. Several times this man came to visit. He would leave to pump his gas after staring at me awkwardly. At the 4th or 5th time after I thought he had left, I hear a knock on the other side of the barn on the glass. There he was, face pressed against the glass, staring at me with his wide, manic grin and waving at me with his fingers. It was enough to send me running for the manager when he left, demanding to go on break before I peed myself. The last time I saw him, I would not forget, though. It has been etched into my mind so deeply that I doubt bleach could scrub it away. He arrives as he usually did and orders his gas. This time, however, he reached through the hole in the glass and grabbed my hand before I could put the cash away into the cash register. It wasn't a violent grab, but it was firm enough to keep me from pulling away. Being a very sheltered 18-year-old girl, I froze in place.
I love you,
he said, refusing to let go of my hand. I simply stared at him, unnerved, and alarm bells ringing in my head.
Say it.
What? I responded.
Say you love me.
Naturally, I just wanted to let this guy go away, and being so freaking scared out of my mind at this point to him, I stammered and said out of impulse, maybe he would let me go and go away if I said this. I love you? I said very uneasily, confused.
Call me if you need anything. What's my number?
He asked again. This threw me off completely, and the look on his face probably gave away my confusion because he repeated himself again, despite me stammering that I did not know. Finally, he said something that made my blood run cold. I felt like I was going to throw up.
It's 911.
He winked. This guy was the sheriff deputy. This person I'd have to call if I got into any sort of trouble in town. The person I'd have to call if I had a medical emergency or someone tried to rob me. He wouldn't let go of my hand. I just nodded, trying to keep myself from shaking bad enough for him to feel it. He had never pulled up in a police car or anything, but when I talked to my manager, she confirmed that what he said was true. Once he did let go of me and went on his way, I retreated to the back and demanded to be relieved from the gas station area. I didn't care, I just did not want to see this guy ever again. Thankfully, we moved soon after, so I never had to, but I will never forget the leering grin this man gave me every single time he purchased gasoline. You'd think moving away would be the end of the story, right? But no, it actually got worse when I went to college, and you wouldn't think that would be the case considering I was in Galveston. I had needed to go to my counselor to discuss a few things, and this usually involved about 30 minutes of chit-chat, as me and my counselor had become close while I was attending school. During one of these chats, which my father had attended due to him attending school in the same class as I was in an effort to finally get his degree, I mentioned Onalaska, Texas, and how we had owned a lake house up there. Instantly, the happy expression left my counselor's face. She informed me that she had been a social worker in that area for quite a few years, and suddenly my childhood playground took an extremely dark turn, and the sheriff at the gas station became a nightmare. Apparently, this area was notorious for pedophilia, kidnappings, and other horrible, horrible incidents. Whole neighborhoods, including police officers, were in on it, and that it was common for people trying to get out of these incidents to either go missing or be completely thrown out of the community through intimidation tactics. She proceeded to tell me that several cases she had worked on, careful to leave out confidential details of course, including incidents of entire families being in on the whole mess. When I told her about the sheriff I'd encountered, she kind of paled and wouldn't tell me any more, except that she wasn't really surprised. The conversation went on for over an hour and a half, but it was enough to make me never want to return to the small town I had called my summer childhood home, and I vowed never, ever to bring any of my children in there that I might have in the future. So to this guy that intercepted my walkie-talkie signal and tried to lure me onto his boat, and to the creepy sheriff, let's never meet again. For the love of God, please. Update. Someone obtained information about the sheriff's department in the area, and it turns out that he was indeed a sheriff's deputy. It's been so long since these events, so I went ahead and edited the story to reflect. This guy is still an active member of the force. Before I start this story, English is not my first language, but since this seems to be the preferred language of this site, let's begin. A little backstory. My mama and papa divorced when I was young. I hardly visit my papa, so he obviously is not a very big part of my life. Now with that part out of the way, I can begin the rest of the story. About 13 or so years ago, at the time I was 11, my mama would go on several dates a night. She was a very lonely woman. When she found men to go out on dates with, she took the chance and went. I don't wish to say that she's dumb, but she really isn't the smartest lady. My abuela told me to stay away from strangers and not to do what my mom does. About a year of the whole dating men every night thing, I'm used to it. 12 and very aware of what happens and what to do. I'm no longer scared of being home alone, so this was already the new normal. My mama decided to take a break from her lifestyle and settled for a week. The reason was because she went on a date with this guy, and he generally sounded like a kind of nice person in her opinion. After the first date, however, she felt differently. He acted very shifty and jittery. Unfortunately, he had our house's phone number, and when my mom answered, all she heard through her phone was soft breathing and then a low, scruffy voice saying, "Angie, ¿por qué no me contesta? ¿Estás bien?" Which roughly translates to, "Angie, why did you not answer me? Are you okay?" Side note from the reader here, I did in fact know what that means. Thanks, high school Spanish. Anyways, my mama answered quickly with, "Sí, Manny, lo siento mucho, pero por favor, no me llame de nuevo." Or, "Yes, Manny, I'm sorry, but please, do not call me again." He then got very angry with her, and I really don't want to tell you some of the things he said, but just know it really wasn't pleasant. A few days had passed, and we were all calming down. But we had noticed that every night at about 6 p.m., there would be a car driving around the block, and then it would speed off slowly after rolling past our house. It was creepy, and I begged my mom to call the police, but we both knew they wouldn't do anything to stop it, considering previous experiences. There was even a note at her door that said, "Vigila tu espalda," which translates to, "Watch your back." We knew who was doing this, but the weirdest thing was my mom never gave him her address, which means that he had to have followed her home or tracked her or something like that. A few weeks later, these incidents died down, and we got comfortable again. My mom left the house to go get something from the gas station, and I went upstairs to my room to watch reruns of Seven Vivas. It was quiet because my dogs were outside and my mom was gone, so I enjoyed the silence and watched my show in peace. But all of that was ruined when I heard the door open. I figured it was my mom and was too lazy to get my phone and call her. I just figured she got back early. I heard footsteps up the stairs and footsteps that came into her room. Once again, I figured that it was her, although it was a little odd she didn't let the dogs in when she came in. I brushed it off and continued watching. Then my phone rang, and I moaned and slowly walked over to the phone and answered. It was my mom. She asked if I wanted anything from the gas station. I hadn't quite caught on and said, "You got back from the store, though, right?" And we both paused, and she answered, "I haven't gotten there yet." That's when I caught on that there was someone else in my house. I started tearing up, and I turned off my TV and got into the closet and told my mom that there was someone in the house. And that's why I asked her these questions. She started freaking out and said she was on her way and not to hang up. "Mom, please don't come home. Call the police instead. You can't handle him," I whispered demandingly in the phone, and my mom said, "Grab your tennis racket in your closet and be very quiet. I have to hang up. I'm calling your father." She hung up, and I could hear the person rummaging through drawers. I held my tennis racket close and backed even further into the closet. Luckily, my dad doesn't live that far away, so he will be quick to get here. My mom called me, and I answered. "Is he coming?" I asked. "Yeah, he's going as fast as he can. He's running red lights." I was pretty worried. I heard a car speeding down the road and speed into my driveway. I figured it was my pa, and so I came out of the closet and looked out the window. To my fear and shock, it was another man in dark clothing. My heart sunk as I rushed back into the closet. My mom was still on the phone, and I whispered to her what I saw. She started crying into the phone, and she told me that she loved me. I could still hear her car speeding through the phone. Minutes passed, and I heard footsteps up the stairs. It sounded like a man's, but not my dad's. I cried even harder, and still my mom told me to hush so that she could hear. She said, "Do you hear that? Listen." I could hear another car speeding down the road again. "Ma, I don't think that's Dad." She reassured me that it could be him, and that she gave me the confidence to look. With that, I did, and I looked. To my relief, it was my dad, and he had something in his hand, black and shiny. I think it was a handgun. I hurried back into the closet, and I heard footsteps running down the stairs and sounding as if they were heading towards the back door. Then I heard my dogs barking and growling viciously. I have a Rottweiler and a German Shepherd, and they are both trained to attack if it's not me, my mom, or anyone with us. I figured my dogs were attacking them and came out of my room and looked down the stairs cautiously. Both my dogs were on top of the two men and biting and ripping at their hands and arms. My father walked in, and with his gun held chest level, he looked at me and moved his eyes behind him, and I knew what he meant. I quietly made my way behind him and saw the two men still being attacked, and my father yelled, "Detenere!" or "Stop." The dogs quickly stopped, and my father walked up to them, and they were bloody, but luckily with the intruder's blood and not their own. And soon after that, my ma walked in. We all kind of hugged each other and went outside while my father dealt with them. The police came in after we called them, and when they came in, they found my father still holding the gun to them. They told my father to put the gun down and leave so they could take care of the criminals. It was indeed the man that my ma had went on a date with, and I guess some accomplice. And on further investigation in my ma's room, there were panties all over the floor. They didn't even get locked up for long. Someone happened to bail them out, and that was the last we heard of it, because my ma, pa, and I have moved away ever since, including our dogs too. We moved to America, and that's where I learned how to speak English. But I will never forget that day and all the events leading up to it. All I've learned from this is be careful and cautious, because that day could have gone very different if my dogs were not there or my mom had never called. So, terrifying man that has scarred me for life, let's please not meet ever again. One day, when I was 10 years old, I got a letter in the mail. I was really happy that somebody had sent me snail mail. I opened it all excited, and it was a drawing I had done for a class exercise of a flamenco dancer, and I had promptly thrown it into the trash bin at school because I didn't like it. On the bottom was a simple sentence: "You're a very talented little girl." I was naive and I liked the compliment, but I showed the letter to my mom, who called my teacher. I then remember she was a bit concerned about where it came from and left it at that, because she told me that she was scared because the teacher didn't send it and she didn't know who else would. A few weeks later, I was alone at home, which is a very rare occurrence for me, when I noticed someone twisting the doorknob. Only a person who had a key could open it, so of course I didn't open it, and someone slipped a letter through the crack underneath. I was a bit afraid of the way the letter had been delivered. My dad came home and opened it afterwards. This time it was a letter talking about how someone was going to give me a new tennis racket, which I played as a kid, because I was so good at the game. At first, my parents thought it was one of their friends wishing me a late happy birthday and promising me a gift, but it wasn't. Now they were getting pretty uncomfortable. About 5 more letters came after this over the course of 3 months. One was even about my taste in books. They talked about how they were proud that I read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. They were, on the face of it, pretty benign letters full of congratulations and pride, but creepily worded and anonymously delivered. I got my first phone around this time, because I played a lot of tournaments and my parents weren't available for all of them. Then the phone calls started. Sometimes it was just static, sometimes breathing, sometimes low laughter, and sometimes he would just say hi again and again and again. I always blocked the numbers and they always seemed to come back. The numbers changed, but I recognized the area code, which remained the same. My parents were so concerned that they stopped taking me to tournaments, hired a guard to stay outside of our house at all times, and called to check in with me every other hour. If I ever missed a call, they would send someone from one of their offices to check on me. Another week went by like this, and they then noticed a small hatchback doing drive-bys of our house every morning, like really early in the morning, at around 5 a.m. on most days. I don't know why they never took down a plate number. Now my parents called the police and talked at length with them, but nothing came of it because there was no substantial anti-stalking laws in the country at the time. My brother and I were on high alert from then on. We hired a full-time guard, full-time help at home, and my mom got cameras installed outside as well. My dad talked to the neighbors and explained the situation, so they were always careful as well. Both my parents worked for the government, and so they had a lot more authority and resources than others to keep us safe. When the landline got frequent phone calls, my dad got up and took one of the calls. He told him calmly to stop what he was doing, and the man responded by apparently letting out a deafening screech and then hanging up. Shaken up, my dad decided to put an end to this. No, he didn't kill my stalker, but he took all the letters to a private faculty to have them fingerprinted. They found several prints. My dad then took the print to the police and had them run it. My dad, keep in mind, was in charge of the police administration. He was not a police officer, but he was in charge of oversight in the city at my time, and no one asked any questions. The prints belonged to my aunt's husband, compared with his voter ID. Let me give you a little background about him. My aunt, who's my mother's sister, who we are very close to, and we still are, was married to a man who was a schizophrenic. I only figured out this a few months ago after my 18th birthday. This was an arranged marriage sort of thing where the parents of the bride and the groom sort of put it together. I mean, it was the 60s in India, that kind of thing was pretty common. And they got along fairly well and it was all good. In time, they even had a daughter who I'm fairly close to even today. The thing is, though I now live in the US, these events took place in India. The mental health scene in India is really not that great. People with mental illnesses, and particularly ones like schizophrenia, where everyone knows something's not quite right, are shunned. They were talked about in hushed whispers, often locked away in rooms and physically cared for but emotionally forgotten. Apparently, after my aunt and uncle were married, the first symptoms of the disease, which actually ran in his family, began to manifest. My aunt, who I love dearly, wasn't exactly thrilled with this. There was a prevailing feeling that the parents of the groom had tried to dupe our family by not revealing that this illness ran in their family. Again, if this all sounds really strange, trust me, these sentiments wouldn't be all out of place in India. Anyway, here's where I was truly horrified when I heard this story. My grandparents and aunt thought in desperation that they should just abandon him on the street because there was so much stigma associated with this mental illness. Before you judge harshly, know that during his episodes he would violently abuse my aunt, my cousin's sister, and even their dog. He would become a monster. Of course, that's no excuse for what they wanted to do, and their whole attitude was incredibly uneducated. Anyways, my mom, who worked with mentally ill and the homeless at the time, stepped in and chided them for their plans. She made sure to take him to a psychiatrist and get meds and therapy for him. This all happened before I was even born, and by the time I was born, he was doing fine. However, whenever I was at their house, I would try and avoid him because he always had this weird smile. I now know that it was the meds that caused him to space out and smile blankly a lot. But through my whole childhood, he just made me uncomfortable. And because of what I thought were unreasonable feelings, I suppressed my discomfort and would scold myself mentally for being so mean and thinking these terrible thoughts about an innocent person. But apparently he started flushing his medication down the toilet the year I turned 10, and he'd become obsessed with me for some reason. That's why the drive-bys were at 5 a.m. He would do them when my aunt thought he was at the gym. That's why he knew our address, my phone number, and had access to plenty of my pictures from my aunt and others in the family, because he was family. He followed me to the point of going through the school's trash. I, of course, had just recently been told all of this. What I actually remember of these events is that my parents were suddenly a lot more cautious about where I went and what I did. At that time, I thought it was pretty annoying, actually. He actually had several pictures of me pinned up on his closet, but because they were mixed in with my brothers and cousins, no one really questioned it. I mean, it is only natural to love your family, after all. That's my story. I don't think he was a pedophile. I think he was just very sick and unstable. My very overprotective dad thinks it was just his misguided way of being proud of me. I don't hate him or even dislike him for all this, and neither do my parents. I understand how important properly responding to mental health issues are, so my aunt ensures he never goes off his medication these days. No, they didn't even get a divorce either. He seems to be doing very well. He just retired from his job this April. Even his daughter, my cousin, seems to have made her peace with his abusive behavior in the past, and understands that the issue stems from poor understanding of mental health. Even now I see him regularly at family gatherings. He just makes lame jokes and everyone laughs. He's perfectly nice and generally has been a great uncle to me since that time. So there you have it. Sometimes the monsters exist within your family, and sometimes they turn out to not be monsters at all.